So there's this growing debate that I'm hearing, and I even had it brought up once by someone saying, "Oh, well, you're telling us that we have to throw out all of our literature because we have to read, all nonfiction." Where are we at with that debate? I mean, obviously that's not what the Common Core says, but why is that perception out there?
It's scary at first to see the 70% and 30% number, but when you break down exactly what that means across the curriculum and across an entire class, it's not that bad. Even in 12th grade, if 70% of your curriculum is nonfiction, that still means that you have a 30% of your curriculum that is literature. And you get to the 70% not just in one class, but you get to it across the curriculum. So if your school is set up so that you're reading a lot in science and social studies and math, well, that, of course, is going to be almost purely nonfiction and will be entirely the kinds of informational texts that are so important for college success. The English class, though, in addition to attacking a lot of the nonfiction, is going to be where you get the literature.
That's interesting, because somebody said to me, in terms of the 70-30 split, that it's really, the Common Core was written for students. And so when they talk about things like 70 and 30, it's the student's experience. It's not the teacher's reality. It's what the student's reality is going to be. So how have you had to shift your practice for the Common Core, if at all, as an English teacher, a full-time English teacher?
It was actually really liberating for me because the Common Core is so text dependent and gives such pride of place to the text that I had realized that I was breaking reading up into a set of strategies or a set of skills to too great a degree. So once I was using the Common Core, it was a set of understandings or concepts that allowed me to select a really rigorous text, be it fiction or nonfiction, and then design a series of lessons around it. And what I would usually do is first I would pick the text. I would go to the Common Core to understand what the scholar should be learning. And then I would use the Bloom's Pyramid to scaffold a series of questions that we would use in the course of 4 lessons. And that was just so much easier than trying to think of, all right, what's a short story I know that will hit, this GLE because it's on the state test. Instead, I was just choosing texts, and I had a small number of standards to help me to navigate through them with the scholars, and then all of the teaching that I knew how to do to create these lessons where we would really understand a difficult story, like, for instance, the dead.
Kindergarten to second grade teachers have used the same exact word, that they can now teach informational text, that they can now read about Antarctica, that they can now read about agriculture, that they can now read about explorers through read aloud of complex text. They found that liberating in the same way that you found the focus on the text liberating.
How have your students responded differently from the strategies-based, you're sort of in service to the GLEs versus in service to the text and really exploring it as scholars?
Yeah, they appreciate it when we spend a lot of time on a text. So one thing that I often hear from the teachers in my school and from me is, I'm worried that this text is going to be too hard. And one thing I've never heard is, yeah, I was right. I really should have used a simpler text.
I had a question about the level of work that you did as far as the students being able to make inferences, especially when they were talking about the maid in the story and really breaking that down. What do you say that you've done to help them get up to that point? Do you think that it's strictly based on the type of text that you're putting in front of the students, or are there other things that you've been doing to help them with that?
Well, it starts with the text. If the text is complex, then they rise to the level of the text. So if it was an easier text, they wouldn't see the value in doing that kind of work. I think, though, it was my focus this whole year. I realized that my students last year weren't using the text in a way that would actually help them in college or on these difficult exams. So from the very beginning, I was focusing on using the evidence from the text to answer questions and trying to make these connections between these deep structures and parts of texts. And once I was saying that for a whole year, I believe this was filmed in March, they had gotten used to it. So it got to the point where I didn't so much have to tell them, like, you have to use some evidence now. They just knew, all right, I better have something to back this up with, because I know that he's going to say, where'd you find that?
So Aidan, this is your AP class, right? In your other classes, your lower level classes, how have you seen the Common Core working in there? Have you had to have a different approach because of your students?
What the Common Core does, again, as long as you're focusing on the text, I find that you'll have some students who get it more quickly, right? Because we all teach a range of students, and that's part of the point. When the text is so important, then you're giving your kids a set of tools to understand. So even if you're a scholar who usually takes a little bit longer to get something, you know where all the answers are. And if something is moving too fast for you, then you can say, like, all right, like, I need to step back for a moment and reread this. So even in the classes that would tend to take a little bit longer to get to this point, I can just take longer, perhaps read, fewer texts, but hit the same level of depth so that each of those texts will stay with them and will be useful for them. But I have not at all found a student who could not access the Common Core ideas because of their level.
So you might slow the pace down because they need some more time with the text.
Yeah.
But the approach stays the same.
Right.
One of the things we found in working with groups of teachers around the country with reading more complex text closely is very often teachers would say, well, this is what I do with my AP classes, but I never thought I could do it with my non-AP classes. And as Aidan said, with the scaffolds and with the support, with the multiple readings, with the working in groups, with the writing and with integrating the writing and the speaking, and the listening and the reading, then you can do the same kind of deep, close reading with kids who are not in AP.
In AP is the only time very bright students are asked to struggle with text, and we've assigned the word struggling reader to weak readers, right? And that's sort of our parlance as educators. And yet the Common Core is really asking everybody to wrestle with or struggle with text in a way that makes it meaningful, that gives them that sense of accomplishment and discovery that we're looking for. And we usually only grant it to the AP students. And one of the things I've seen when I'm teaching is it's those bright, facile kids that aren't very disciplined that have been rewarded for sort of using text as springboard to their own articulate ideas that are most resistant. And weaker kids who are used to struggling are very happy to be struggling alongside the rest of their peers. Yeah. And it's this wonderful egalitarian thing that's happening in classrooms where teachers are making these changes.